I remember the day humanity was banished with unsettling clarity. In the Grand Chamber of Arbitration on Galactica, seat of the Galactic Council, I stood among dozens of other junior envoys from every corner of civilized space. Tall pillars of shimmering crystal loomed overhead, refracting lights from 1,000 artificially sustained suns. The dome's architecture had been designed to instill awe and submission, a testament to the Council's dominion across the galaxy. This day was to be the final hearing regarding the Sol System species that had proven so unpredictable. Humanity had been accused of bringing disruptive ideas, of meddling in conflicts, and of defying age-old protocols. I was still a relatively untested observer at the time, serving the Cephan delegation. My name is Ambassador Sarai. In those days, I was not yet an ambassador, merely a novice attaché responsible for note-taking and reviewing statements. Nonetheless, as I watched the assembled council delegates, from the proud Serpentine Valerians to the stoic Vidian Dominion, stand in stern judgment, I felt a prickle of foreboding. The entire spectacle was infused with confidence verging on arrogance. The High Chancellor, a towering figure draped in deep blue robes woven of filament from the Celestine Nebula, presided from a podium that rose at the very center of the chamber's circular arrangement. Representatives of humanity stood across from the council dais. There were not many of them, 4 or 5 if memory serves. The council had demanded the presence of an official ambassador, and Randall Martinez had come, accompanied by 3 silent aides. She was not physically imposing, but there was a composed intensity to her. The swirl of dissatisfaction in the chamber was palpable. Some council members considered human adaptability to be a threat. Others insisted that humankind's creative solutions to old conflicts undermined centuries of carefully curated precedent. From what I had gleaned, the final charge was that their capacity for unexpected lateral thinking destabilized the traditional methods by which the council maintained order. I recall the hush that fell when High Chancellor Trazadum, who at that time still commanded universal respect, leaned forward and gave his formal statement. He insisted that for the continued stability of the galaxy, the species known as humanity must be denied full membership and placed under indefinite restriction. They would be banned from traveling beyond their system, forbidden from occupying galactic space. Perhaps 1 or 2 delegates from minor civilizations voiced quiet opposition, but the overall sentiment was resolute. In that place of solemn crystal and gleaming spires, with thousands of eyes fixed upon them, humankind was pronounced a dangerous, unchecked variable. Their presence in the wider galaxy was declared an unacceptable risk to the established equilibrium. Most banishment ceremonies, from what the record showed, involved protest, pleas for leniency, or even desperate attempts to negotiate. But Ambassador Martinez did not grovel. She listened, lips pressed into a thin line, as the council's edict was read in the official tongues. The sentence was unequivocal. Humanity would be restricted to its home star system, quarantined, and monitored as Quarantine Zone Alpha. Attempting to violate the ban would incur immediate council-sanctioned destruction. She and her people would have 3 days to leave council space, after which point the official severance would be enacted. When given her final opportunity to speak, Martinez scanned the amphitheater of alien delegates. There was no pity to be found among most of them. With only the faintest trace of bitterness, she uttered a few lines I have remembered ever since. "We accept your judgment, but be warned, counselors. You might wish to reconsider how easily you discard entire civilizations. You could find that you've merely gifted us the incentive to grow in ways you never imagined. Good luck enforcing your decree." At that, an impatient hush fell among the outraged delegates. One of the Draconian Alliance ambassadors, scales bristling, pounded a claw upon his dais and demanded censure for the insolence. But Martinez simply shrugged, leading her entourage out of the Grand Chamber. 3 days later, under the formalities of the ritual of severance, the Council removed the Sol System's star charts from official records. They ceremoniously took back the Council emblem from the human embassy and, in a final gesture, ended all official communications. In effect, Earth and its inhabitants were gone. At the time, it was considered a triumph of the Council's authority. The press releases across the galaxy echoed a single triumphant note: humanity is contained for the greater good. The galaxy had a habit of moving on quickly. New trade routes needed establishing, border disputes needed arbitrating, and the bureaucracy of cosmic governance marched on. So for a while, after we parted ways on Galactica, humankind became a footnote in the cosmos. But for me, Ambassador Sarai, that day lodged in my mind like a thorn. I saw in Martinez's eyes a quiet determination, something that did not promise submission, but rather a future reckoning. Over the following decade, I was attached to the Cephan delegation assigned the rather thankless task of monitoring Quarantine Zone Alpha. We had half a dozen sensor buoys placed at the helipause of the Sol system. Any sign of unauthorized starships crossing its boundaries would be noted, analyzed, and presumably escalated. The first few years' worth of reports were bland. Earth's vessels limited themselves to local travel, resource extraction around Mars and the asteroid belt, occasionally sending manned missions to Jupiter's moons. All of it was typical, unimpressive development, the sort any newly spacefaring race might attempt. Humanity, after all, had already proven adept at colonizing their own system even before banishment. But as time crept on, the Council's interest waned. The Draconian Alliance demanded fewer updates, content that no major violations were detected. The Vidian Dominion shifted focus to a separate crisis along their frontier. Our sensor buoys were still out there, dutifully scanning, but the data came in only sporadically. By the 15th year, the Council mandated that monitoring occur quarterly. Soon after, it became semi-annual. A story once regarded as an urgent problem was relegated to a trifling historical footnote. Meanwhile, I continued to submit my reports, though only a handful of archivists bothered to read them. Behind this routine, something nagged at me. The humans had not sent out a single official message. Not once did Earth request special materials that might be scarce in their system. They did not import foreign goods, no refined metals, no advanced technology they might have pleaded for. If they had, I suspect the Council would have denied them anyway. But even an appeal for a single shipment of rare isotopes never came. Not one petition to rejoin the Council in a more limited capacity was filed. Not even an apology. They simply vanished from the grand stage. I sometimes confided my misgivings to my superior, but he dismissed me politely, half lashing the ends of his tentacles in that exasperated Cephan manner. Sarai, you overthink. They have accepted containment. We have far more pressing matters to address, such as the trade agreement with the Valerians. Focus your energies on what truly matters. So I bowed, marking the conversation closed. Some of the sensor data, though, was perplexing. Around the 20th year, there were subtle gravitational anomalies at the far edges of the Kuiper belt, near the region humans called Sedna. No direct sign that ships were jumping away. Faster-than-light travel signatures normally displayed tachyon spikes, or the presence of exotic matter. We found none of that, just odd readings, isolated bursts of radiation. The official explanation was likely solar flares interacting with pockets of cosmic dust. A footnote in the monthly logs. About 3 decades after the banishment, the Council launched a short investigation into the asteroids around Sol to see if maybe humans were stockpiling resources. Again, the data revealed nothing suspicious, just standard mining outposts. Even so, I saw a pattern in the transmissions that ended abruptly whenever a Council scanning vessel approached. It was as if the humans wanted to seem docile. My superiors claimed I was constructing conspiracies where none existed. Perhaps they were right. I had no proof, just vague intuitions. Time passed. The Council busied itself with maintaining order across star clusters rife with new problems. The quantum hive mind of Betelgeuse demanded representation. Entire arcs of the outer rim needed surveying. The Vidian Dominion warred with rebellious colonies. At official gatherings, the subject of humanity's banishment rarely surfaced anymore. When it did, it was as a casual anecdote. Remember those humans, so troublesome, so brash? Well, they're locked away now, good riddance. The decades stretched into half a century, then 70 years, then 80. To the average citizen of the galaxy, humankind was little more than a rumor. Some bizarre, short-lived species quarantined for the crime of being too unpredictable. A handful of historians found them interesting enough to produce documentaries, but the footage used was archaic, incomplete, and often heavily dramatized. I remember one comedic depiction, humans as tentacled amphibians obviously confused with an aquatic species from Proxima 6Z. The broader public accepted these amusements with mild curiosity and swiftly moved on. Yet among certain diplomatic circles there were whispered jokes. They must be planning something or they're too proud to beg for re-entry. None of us realized how close the first part of that joke might be to the truth. The anomalies continued, sometimes accompanied by the sudden failure of sensor buoys. The official excuse was always mechanical degradation. Budget constraints, the Council claimed, prevented regular replacements. Quarantine Zone Alpha became functionally unmonitored, save for the occasional passing scout ship. Those of us paying attention wondered if we should be worried, but the Council had already turned its gaze elsewhere. A century after the banishment, I had risen in my career, though not spectacularly. I had become a recognized senior envoy in the Cephan Diplomatic Corps, enough that my name occasionally appeared on rosters for mid-level negotiations. I had grown older. Cephan can live multiple centuries, so I was still far from venerable. My interest in humans, though, had never waned. I compiled my own private archive of their history, gleaned from the scraps of data we'd collected in years past. It was a lonely pursuit, but I felt compelled by an inexplicable fascination. Something about their resilience, their capacity to adapt, intrigued me in a way no other species had. Then came the day that changed the galaxy forever. I was in a council chamber on Cephan Prime, being formally congratulated on a minor achievement. I'd brokered a trade arrangement for helium-3 resources with a minor star cluster. It was hardly a groundbreaking success, but it earned me a short ceremony in which I was to receive ceremonial sashes for my tentacles. As I stood there before our local officials, the entire room's communication devices erupted in shrill alarms. Typically, a mass alert signaled a cosmic threat, a rogue black hole, a violent incursion, or some other calamity. But this time, the news was more disturbing. Unidentified vessels have appeared at Junction Station Alpha, the automated voice announced. Origin unknown. Estimated 100 ships, 200, 300, present count 400. They are not responding to standard identification protocols. My sash ceremony halted immediately. Eyes turned to me as a ranking envoy, though I could only stare back in horror. Reports poured in. The vessels seemed to have materialized simultaneously. The station's scanners showed no typical warp signatures, no jump gates activated, no subspace distortions. They were simply there. Many species scrambled their defense fleets. The Council was in a panic. Some speculated an invasion from an unidentified extragalactic force. Others whispered about advanced enclaves rumored to exist in the Perseus void. The truth arrived 3 hours later in the form of a single, calm broadcast that blanketed every official frequency. Attention, Galactic Council. The new human accord greets you after a prolonged absence. We request a diplomatic meeting at your earliest convenience. We come in peace, but we will not be ignored.
The mention of human accord fell like a thunderbolt across the galaxy. The excitement, or rather the terror, was immediate. Rumors flew that humans had discovered alliances with powerful species in the uncharted territories, or that they had enslaved entire star clusters, or that they had stolen advanced technology from a hidden ancient civilization. For a moment, the Council was paralyzed. Did they dare respond? Some delegates proposed mobilizing an immediate war fleet. Others shouted that this would be suicidal. No one knew what kind of power these hundreds of ships possessed. Finally, the Council decided to send a diplomatic team for urgent negotiations, hoping to buy time while understanding the threat. By sheer happenstance, my name was added to the observer list. We were to meet at a neutral station on the outskirts of Council territory for the first time in a century. an official diplomatic encounter with humans would take place. We arrived at the station with caution. Battleships from the Valerian Armada hovered nearby, just in case. The moment we docked, I saw them, a small delegation of humans waiting in the designated lounge. They looked different from the archival images, taller, more poised, with subtle technological augmentations visible in their retinas or under their skin. At the forefront stood a woman who introduced herself as Admiral Sophia Chen of the New Human Accord. She spoke in the universal lingua without need of translator implants, her words crisp and perfectly pitched. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, her eyes scanning us with unsettling speed. "We have much to discuss." It was the first time in my life I saw the Council's representatives at a loss for words. Ambassador Claynar from the Draconian Alliance, a volatile figure, couldn't contain his outrage for long. He roared, "You are trespassing in direct violation of the banishment declared by this council a century ago." Admiral Chen barely batted an eyelash. "We respect your laws insofar as they remain just," she answered. "But your quarantine served its purpose, it no longer does." At that point, another human stepped forward. Technical Director Benjamin Okonwo, a tall figure with an air of calm intelligence. He displayed a small device strapped to his wrist. Without warning, the station's main display lit up, showing the 100 or more human vessels outside. A hush fell over the hall as Okonwo touched the device, and one ship vanished from the screen. Then, a second display flickered to life, revealing that same ship floating above Centaurus Prime, seat of the Council, nearly 30 light-years away. 3 seconds had elapsed between vanish and arrival. Linar's reptilian eyes bulged in disbelief. "That's impossible." Okano flashed a polite smile. "Not for us," he said. "Not anymore." From there, the negotiations, or declarations, proceeded at a breakneck pace. The humans announced their return to galactic affairs under the banner of the New Human Accord. They stated their intention to open embassies on council worlds, to engage in free travel through recognized hyperlanes, and to end any notion of a quarantine. They did not phrase these as requests. They were, in effect, new facts to which the council would have to adjust. The council's officials were at a loss. The banishment decree theoretically gave them the right to retaliate with force, but how could they possibly enforce it against a civilization that had apparently achieved forms of travel beyond any known method? Some, like the Vidian Dominion's representative, demanded a show of strength, only to be discreetly reminded that if humans could appear at Centaurus Prime in seconds, then no planet was truly out of reach. Rumors circulated that the humans had discovered or invented a form of unified field propulsion. Others hinted they might have harnessed wormhole engineering or discovered a stable Alcubierre-like drive. The truth was unclear, but it was plain that the once quarantined species now possessed technology leaps beyond what the Council had restricted them from exploring. It was as though, in cutting them off from standard research paths, the Council had forced them to develop radical alternatives. In the days that followed, humans revealed that they had colonized regions the Council had written off as resource poor. They had formed alliances with at least a dozen other neglected or dismissed species, co-creating new forms of biotech, starship designs, and energy production. Many of these species had been labeled primitive by the Council and left to languish on the margins of recognized space. Now they were integrated into the Accord, sharing knowledge and forging forward at a blistering pace. The Council, which had prided itself on thousands of years of careful oversight and methodical expansions, found itself behind. High Chancellor Traz Aduman, once so confident, apparently fell ill under the stress and resigned from his position. A new wave of political conflict roiled the established hierarchies. Some of the old allies of the Council saw the New Human Accord as an opportunity, believing they could obtain new technologies if they aligned with the humans. Others, like the Vidian Dominion, refused to yield, calling for collective armed action. That notion died quickly when the Dominion tested a stealth cruiser near one of the human ships, only for it to be rendered inert in seconds, with all weapon systems and propulsion offline. No fatalities, just a quiet, decisive demonstration that force would not avail them. I watched with a mixture of awe and dread as star nations jostled to curry favor with the Accord. The mercile guilds of Riel, known for mercenary commerce, scrambled to sign trade deals as they had an unerring instinct for profit. Several species that had long been overshadowed by the major powers leaped at the chance to ally with the humans. Meanwhile, Council loyalists tried to maintain unity, insisting that humans must abide by the old protocols. Admiral Chen's stance was consistent. We will not be returning to your old protocols. We will chart a path forward that benefits all. If you are willing to meet us halfway. Now, I had never had a conversation with a post-banishment human, so it was to my great surprise when I received a direct invitation from the Accord to board their flagship, a vessel named the Prometheus, for informal discussions. My superiors gave me permission, albeit with caution. The moment I stepped aboard that ship, I knew we had crossed into a realm that defied the Council's centuries of knowledge. The corridors pulsed with a faint organic glow, the walls subtly shifting to accommodate my preferences for atmospheric composition. A gentle voice, presumably an AI or the ship's living system, asked if I was comfortable. Admiral Chen greeted me in a room with reconfigurable seating that adapted to my Cephon physiology. Everything was so intuitive, so beyond the mechanical consoles I was used to seeing on standard Council starships. Chin explained the ship was grown, not built, a biosynthetic technology developed with a species called the Korga, who specialized in advanced bioengineering. The Prometheus, like other Accord vessels, had partial sentience, enabling it to respond empathically to its crew. Imagine the possibilities, Chen said, gesturing at the flowing architecture. No more crude nuclear reactors. No more dependence on unstable tachyon channels. We discovered so many other ways. I realized that in my century of trivial monitoring, the humans had undergone an evolutionary leap. The Accord was not just a human empire, it was an alliance of the marginalized, a synergy of species that had once been locked out of the Council's mainstream. Driven by necessity, they had solved problems that the Council considered unsolvable. They had done so quietly and in regions no one bothered to scan because they were deemed worthless. In those days, following their grand reveal, the Council scrambled to broker a new relationship. I found myself thrust into a critical role as a sort of liaison because of my long-standing curiosity about humans. Chen told me, "You've observed us for decades, Ambassador Sarai. You're one of the few who bothered to keep an open mind. That's precisely what we need. People who can adapt to new realities instead of denying them." Thus began a whirlwind of negotiations that would reshape the galaxy. The Council attempted to reassert its authority, only to discover that it no longer had the power to do so unilaterally. The humans, for their part, offered to share certain medical advancements, new forms of clean energy, and advanced terraforming methods under strictly controlled conditions. They never spoke of weapons technology, nor did they provide any. The subtext was clear. The Council would not be allowed to replicate the means by which the Accord could teleport ships across light years in a blink. Species started picking sides or forming new alliances. The Pharos coalition openly embraced the humans, claiming moral high ground for having originally voted against the banishment. The Valerians, more militaristic, tried to posture until a few of their cruisers were gently neutralized when they attempted an unauthorized incursion into Accord territory. The torpid, bureaucratic behemoth that had ruled the galaxy realized that it was now faced with an equal or perhaps a superior. It was at this time that the Council met in an extraordinary session to debate what to do about the old banishment decree. Some argued they should reaffirm it, though that was patently absurd given the new circumstances. Others insisted it was a relic best forgotten. Ultimately, the Council stalled, uncertain how to proceed with dignity. Meanwhile, humans established formal embassies in major star systems, forging trade agreements that bypassed traditional Council shipping lanes. The formation of these new trade routes threatened to erode the Council's economic stronghold. A century earlier, the banishment had been greeted with triumph. Now, 200 years after that momentous day in the Grand Chamber, the Council found itself forced to reconcile with a power that no longer needed recognition. It had grown beyond those old boundaries entirely. I traveled widely during that period. In the capacity of liaison, I witnessed the Accords territory along the galactic margins. I saw star systems that the Council had once labeled useless turned into thriving centers of commerce and research. Humans had formed symbiotic relationships with smaller species, helping them develop, in turn benefiting from their unique talents. It was precisely the sort of progressive approach that the Council had proclaimed but never truly practiced. The living starships, the integrated AI, the harmonious blending of minds and machines, these were not terrifying abominations, but rather carefully honed tools that advanced entire civilizations. My final step came when the newly appointed High Chancellor of the Council, an older figure named Salvin Coe, announced an official session to address the banishment decree in a public forum. By then, it was more of a symbolic gesture, as humans had already flouted that decree. But to salvage the Council's dignity, a formal repeal would be declared. Delegates from both sides gathered on Centaurus Prime, that same planet where 100 years ago humans were forcibly expelled. The ceremony was a curious affair. A council elder read from the original banishment text, then announced that it was nullified effective immediately. There was a pause, a silence in which everyone understood how hollow these proceedings were. The humans were well beyond requiring official permission. They had practically become the second great pillar of galactic order. Still, it was an attempt at reconciliation, perhaps. Admiral Chen, representing the Accord, stood calmly, expression neutral. By her side, a younger woman named Caroline Martinez, presumably descended from Randa Martinez, observed the entire ritual with a wry smile. Afterwards, at the reception, I overheard Caroline say softly to me, "It's good they're finally repealing it, even if it's a century too late." I asked whether she and her fellow humans harbored any enduring resentment. She gave a little laugh. Resentment? We should probably send them a thank you card. Without their ban, we'd have squandered centuries conforming to their system. Instead, we discovered our own path. She gestured to the cluster of alien dignitaries from a half-dozen species, all discussing technology deals with newly arrived humans. Look at them now, forced to adapt. This entire galaxy has become a better place for it. We learned to expand, they learned to tolerate difference. Funny how history can twist.
In the months following that ceremony, a new order settled over the galaxy. Trade between Accord-aligned systems and Council-aligned worlds flourished. Rivalries persisted, certainly. There were always those who resented the humans' ascendancy. Some predicted that the Council would fade into irrelevance. Others worried that an unchecked Accord might eventually become too dominant, imposing its own brand of governance. But at least for the time being, stability reigned. Two power blocks, each offering its own approach, made the galaxy more dynamic. This dual structure allowed smaller species to negotiate better terms than they ever could have under a monolithic council. As for me, I spend much of my time assisting with the integration of new diplomatic norms. Our old systems, whether Cephan or Draconian or Vidian, had never encountered an entire civilization that had leapfrogged standard technology so drastically. The need for new interstellar laws, guidelines on biotech usage, and ethical standards for partial ship sentience abounded. In an odd twist of fate, I found myself traveling to Earth itself, the homeworld once declared quarantine, to attend a Concord summit. That planet, with its swirling blue oceans, had become a symbol of rebirth. Hosting delegates from 200 species, I arrived expecting to see a battered, overpopulated world still reeling from centuries of isolation. Instead, I was greeted by a thriving hub of cross-species exchange. Earth had changed drastically. Floating cities dotted the skies, powered by clean energy systems apparently co-developed with the drift nomads of Perseus. Towering spires shaped from living metal soared above the old continents. Ancient forests, once thought destroyed, had been regenerated using advanced ecological engineering. The entire atmosphere buzzed with optimism and possibility. Walking through a corridor lined with vibrant holographic murals, I passed images of various species: human, Korga, Andromedan, and more. Hands or tentacles or limbs extended in unity. The stylized depictions emphasized the sense that Earth had become a meeting ground for the once marginalized. The summit itself took place in a circular amphitheater reminiscent of the old Grand Chamber on Galactica. but instead of rigid crystal columns, it featured living walls and gentle illumination that seemed to adapt to the day-night cycle artificially projected from above. Caroline Martinez was present, as was Admiral Chen and Technical Director Okonwo. Across from them sat representatives from the Council, a newly confirmed High Chancellor who carefully expressed the Council's interest in deeper collaboration. The atmosphere was not entirely devoid of tension. Generations of Council rule had not simply evaporated, yet there was a sense of cautious respect. No longer did the major powers dismiss humans as an unpredictable threat. They were, for better or worse, a decisive voice in galactic affairs. During one evening event, as delegates mingled and exchanged pleasantries, I found myself speaking with Chen and Martinez. Chen's silver-gray eyes, laced with a faint flicker of biotech augmentation, always seemed to be analyzing. I told her how I had once worried that humanity would re-emerge angry, bent on vengeance, or determined to shatter the Council by force. She shook her head. We never wanted a scorched galaxy. Banishment gave us freedom from old constraints and forced us to innovate. In many ways, it was the best thing that could have happened. When we came back, we wanted to build, not to destroy. Martinez added, "Oh, many of us felt angry when we were first confined, but over time that anger turned into a quiet determination to prove that the Council had made a terrible mistake. We didn't have the resources or the standard technologies, so we found others. We discovered new ways to travel, new ways to thrive, and we found others like us, species cast aside, overlooked. Together, we forged something bigger than any of us could have done alone." I remember standing by a wide window in that floating Earth city, gazing out at a night sky filled with new starships and the glimmer of orbital constructs. I realized that this was not merely a human empire. It was a tapestry woven from the threads of a dozen different species, all united by the experience of being shunted aside, forced to break rules in order to survive. The Council, in its zeal to maintain the status quo, had unknowingly sown the seeds of a rival system that was arguably more innovative and diverse than anything it had allowed under its own oversight. That sense of marvel stayed with me for the rest of the summit. There were negotiations for cultural exchanges, for the preservation of knowledge, for economic synergy that could benefit billions of sentient beings across the galaxy. Of course, disagreements cropped up. Old resentments from certain Council loyalists occasionally flared. But the sheer momentum of the new order seemed unstoppable. Even the most conservative enclaves within the Council had to admit that humans and their allied species were now integral to galactic stability. At one point during a private conversation, I asked Admiral Chen if she ever thought about what might have happened had the Council not banished Earth. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We might have spent centuries locked in the Council's ways of research and exploration. Innovation would have come slowly, in incremental steps. We might have integrated so thoroughly we would lose that creative spark the Council found so dangerous. It's possible we never would have encountered the Korga or the other species that lived beyond the recognized frontiers. We'd have become an ordinary member of a grand union. Perhaps that would have been easier. But we wouldn't have soared as high. Those words echoed in me for a long time. Easier, yes, but greatness rarely emerges from easy roads. By the close of the summit, an official resolution declared that the banishment decree of centuries past was a relic of a previous era, formally annulled. The new human accord was welcomed as a partner. In practice, this was just a rubber stamp on a reality that had already taken shape. But it did mark a symbolic moment in the galaxy's history. Humanity, once exiled and left to rot in a single star system, now stood as an equal force shaping the cosmos. On my return journey, I visited a newly established Council Accord research facility, orbiting a small star near the fringes of what used to be considered worthless space. There, I found scientists from different species working together on advanced terraforming for planetoids once thought uninhabitable. The station's corridors were abuzz with talk of implementing hybrid biotech solutions, gleaned from the humans and the Korga, to create sustainable ecosystems. Every conversation I overheard was brimming with excitement, an excitement I had rarely seen under the old order. It was as if after centuries of stagnation, the galaxy had awoken to realize it was capable of so much more if it would only break certain self-imposed barriers. Surely not all was perfect. Politics remained a messy affair. Rivalries, suspicion, and greed did not vanish overnight. The Vidian Dominion harbored deep grudges, certain that the humans had humiliated them. The Draconian Alliance struggled to remain relevant when faced with technology that rendered old forms of intimidation useless. Rumors circulated that certain rogue factions were desperate to replicate the humans' faster-than-light capabilities, even if it meant dangerous experiments. Yet overall, this new age felt more balanced. No single entity held absolute dominance. The Council might have continued controlling the galaxy for millennia if humanity had not upended their illusions of security. Several years after that summit, I found myself on Earth once more, invited to a smaller gathering called the Centennial Concord Celebration. This time, they held it not in a grand amphitheater but in an open-air environment near what humans called the Redwood Forests. Towering trees soared into a misty sky. I was told many of these trees had once been endangered, but with advanced bioreclamation technology, the forest was thriving again. Among the ancient trunks, delegates from dozens of species mingled, exchanging ideas in a setting that bridged human heritage and futuristic aspiration. I walked under the vast canopy, absorbing the scents and the gentle luminescence from engineered bioluminescent vines. A hush of reverence fell among the crowd as Caroline Martinez stood atop a small platform made of living wood. She recited a short speech about how her great-great-grandmother had once left this planet under threat of annihilation. Now, Earth was a beacon of cooperation, hosting countless visitors in peace. She spoke of second chances, of how exile can become empowerment, of how the galaxy needs multiple centers of power to remain healthy and just. Everyone listened with rapt attention, from the tall, austere Vididian to the four-armed, shrill-voiced merchants from the Riel guilds. It was a moment that captured the essence of how far things had come. At the end of her speech, Caroline glanced at me, standing among the crowd, and offered a small smile. I felt an unexpected swell of emotion. After centuries of tension, conflict, and misunderstanding, here we were, united by more than just necessity. There was a genuine sense of discovery and optimism. Even those old council bureaucrats who had once championed the banishment now admitted the galaxy was better off, with fresh ideas challenging the old ways. After the ceremony, I wandered off on my own, stepping among the enormous roots of the redwoods, marveling at their living grandeur. My mind drifted back to that day in the Grand Chamber of Arbitration, when I stood in the shadows, listening to the decree that exiled humanity. It struck me how no one in that chamber had predicted this outcome. The council had believed it was preserving order. Instead, it had unleashed an evolution none of us saw coming. That, to me, was the greatest testament to the unpredictability and potential within every species, especially the one we had tried to confine. Toward nightfall, I made my way to a small clearing where a handful of representatives, human and otherwise, were having an informal discussion about the next steps for exploration beyond the galaxy's spiral arms. The humans had apparently perfected certain advanced drive systems that might allow stable passage to dwarf galaxies, or perhaps open new frontiers. Where the old council might have restricted such research for fear of unleashing unknown perils, the Accord insisted that cosmic curiosity was part of what defined an advanced civilization. This notion, I realized, would have been heresy to the counselors of old, so fixated on controlling and cataloging every known star. Listening to them deliberate, I felt a burst of excitement. They spoke not of conquering or seizing territory, but of learning and forging alliances with whatever they might find. The conversation turned to risk, but there was acceptance that no exploration is without danger. One human scientist mentioned a plan to partner with the quantum hive mind of Betelgeuse to gather advanced mathematics for charting subspace anomalies. A draconian pilot, surprisingly open-minded, offered to test new inertial dampening fields, and I, Ambassador Serai of the Cephon, added my voice to the discussion, reminding them that mutual respect is the best shield against cosmic misunderstandings. In that moment, I understood with certainty that a new dawn had indeed arrived. The banishment of humanity was not only undone, it was rendered a relic of a time when fear outweighed curiosity. Now the galaxy was shaped by two main pillars, the venerable but transformed Council and the dynamic, emergent Accord. The tension between them could be a source of conflict, but it could also foster creativity. Perhaps for the first time in millennia, stagnation was replaced by genuine progress. Looking back on it all, I can say that the single most impactful lesson is not about technology or politics, but perspective. Humanity and the species they uplifted turned adversity into an opportunity. By locking them away, the Council gave them independence. By labeling them a threat, the Council forced them to find allies among the likewise discarded. By severing them from conventional research, the Council made them pioneers of unconventional methods. And for all these reasons, the banishment became the catalyst for a more vibrant galactic order. Standing there under the ancient redwoods, hearing the distant hum of starships in the twilight sky, I felt the swirl of cosmic possibility. Our galaxy was bigger and more alive than we had ever acknowledged under the old system. No one knew precisely where this new era would lead, but I had a feeling it would be somewhere extraordinary. And as we parted ways that evening, myself, the humans, the draconians, the far-flung allies from corners unknown, we carried with us a shared understanding that sometimes the greatest leaps forward arise when a door is slammed shut, leaving you no choice but to find another way out. That is how I have come to view the banishment of humanity, not as a tragic or shameful chapter, but as a turning point. Banished by the Galactic Council, humanity forged an empire of its own, and in doing so taught us all that potential can flourish when given the freedom to grow without the shackles of old paradigms. What began as an act of forced isolation turned into the impetus for forging alliances, discovering unexplored territories, and mastering technologies once deemed impossible. Today, I live in a galaxy where two powers ensure that no single authority becomes complacent. We have checks, we have balances, and we have the drive to keep exploring. I sometimes reread my old reports from the early decades after the banishment. Back then, I worried that the humans were plotting, or that the Council was making a grave mistake by ignoring them. I had no inkling how thoroughly they would reshape our civilization. Perhaps I had only glimpses, fleeting impressions each time the sensor buoys malfunctioned or faint anomalies cropped up in the Kuiper Belt. In the end, those anomalies were the footprints of an empire in the making, an empire that would return not to beg forgiveness, but to proclaim a bold new reality. Now, as I put these reflections to paper, or rather to the data crystals of the Cephon diplomatic archives, I see beyond the horizon of my own lifetime. This new partnership between Council and Accord has begun constructing a joint expeditionary fleet. They plan to journey into regions so remote that the old star charts end in blank spaces. The drive behind it is mutual benefit, shared science, and, if needed, mutual defense. Sometimes I catch wind of skepticism from Council hardliners or from certain ambitious human factions who might resent cooperation. But for all that, the impetus to move forward together is stronger. I suspect, or perhaps hope, that in another 100 years we will look back on this moment with the same astonishment that we now feel when recalling the day humanity was banished. We will see how each step built upon the last, how adversity turned into impetus, and how the galaxy broadened its horizons one frontier at a time. And I trust that future generations, be they human, Cephon, draconian, or any of the myriad species that share this cosmic tapestry, will find reason to be grateful that what was once cast aside returned, more powerful and more imaginative than ever. That, in essence, is the lesson. Never underestimate the exiled. They might just transform the entire galaxy if given the chance. And sometimes, by denying them everything, you hand them the inspiration to unlock the impossible. Egan swore under his breath as he hovered over the ancient trade console in Docking Bay 62. The terminal's screen flickered incessantly, the translation software jumping from one broken language to another. It felt like someone had programmed it with snippets of archaic alien tongues, then abandoned the whole system to rot. But he needed the parts. The Bronze Phoenix, his battered old ship, had been limping through the cosmos on half a thruster for weeks. If he didn't fix her soon, he'd have no livelihood left. Just a floating death trap. He rubbed his tired eyes and scanned the list of items for the 100th time. Maintenance drone, multitasking, or so the interface suggested. The description was odd. High compatibility, taming required, adaptive, guaranteed satisfaction. A weird label, but the system was too old to decipher properly. Maybe it was just some awkward attempt at marketing. Egan didn't have time to question it. The price was steep, but, he reasoned, worth the risk. He needed a reliable drone to handle all the grunt work on his ship. Confirm purchase, he mumbled, hitting the final accept button. The console glitched twice. A little swirling icon told him the system was processing. Then it spat out a receipt in bright red letters. Item purchased, Alien Bride, premium stock. No refund, no return. Egan blinked. Alien Bride? That can't be right. He tapped the screen, tried to backtrack. The console refused to open any menu that might let him cancel. A warning message popped up in some archaic dialect, which the system then retranslated into broken English. Your purchase is complete. Bride awaiting pickup. He hammered the keys, cursing under his breath. The next message scrolled in an ugly green font. Contract active. Breaking terms results in penalty fees. Wonderful. Now he was saddled with an actual living being he had apparently just bought. As if he were the type to do that. He was already behind on docking fees and had a mountain of debts to the syndicate. He couldn't afford some extortionate penalty on top of everything else. Heart-thumping, Egan scoured the rest of the contract. The language was archaic. References to bondmate, taming, obedience protocol. Every line made him cringe. Damn it, Phoenix, he muttered, jamming the console shut. I just wanted a drone. He walked away, mind whirring. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the order wouldn't actually process. But even as he tried to reassure himself, his chest tightened. He had signed a legally binding agreement. These old corporate rules were absolute nightmares. The docking bay around him was a chaotic market full of hawkers shouting about engine boosters and cheap cryo chambers. The swirl of multi-species chatter hammered his ears, but none of it drowned out the worry rattling around in his head. He made his way back to the Bronze Phoenix, a steel-grav vessel that seemed more rust than hull. Her engines hissed in complaint whenever he asked for full thrust, and the interior lights flickered if he so much as sneezed. But she was his. An inheritance from his late uncle, or more precisely from the uncle's gambling debts. Egan had spent years trying to keep her functional. If he could manage a few more gigs, maybe he'd pay off enough debt to start life anew on some quiet mining colony. As he reached the cargo intake hatch, a bored-looking docking attendant ambled over. You, Egan? That's me. The attendant gestured to a large container sitting on the ramp. Your shipment's here. Egan stared warily. Great, just wheel it on. I'll sign for it. But the attendant smirked. Oh, it's not going to be that simple. Before Egan could ask why, the container door slid open with a hiss. He braced himself, expecting some large mechanical form, maybe a mismatch of parts resembling a robo-servant. Instead, a figure emerged, tall and lithe, stepping off the ramp in fluid, confident strides. She had dark purple-black hair that fell in gleaming waves past her shoulders. A few strands braided with metallic beads. Her skin was emerald green or close to it, with faint swirling patterns along her arms, like living tattoos. She wore something halfway between a sleek bodysuit and a casual flight jacket, unzipped enough to hint at curves that immediately caught Egan's attention, though he forced his gaze away. When she lifted her eyes to him, he noticed the pupils were slit vertically, reminiscent of a cat's. The color glowed gold under the harsh docking bay lights. She looked him up and down, head tilted with a curious amusement. So, she said in a smooth, husky tone, Which one of you is my new owner? Egan's stomach twisted into knots. The docking attendant gave a half laugh, half snort. He is. I'm not, Egan sputtered. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't order. She ignored his protests, stepping closer until he could smell something faintly sweet on her skin. Maybe a natural musk or a perfume he couldn't place. You're Egan? Her lips curved. I'm Kaiva. Pleasure to meet you, husband. He stepped back in a hurry, nearly tripping over a stray toolbox. Husband? That's not... Look, this is all a glitch in the system. I was trying to buy a drone. She raised a brow. So, you accidentally purchased a bride. The attendant shrugged. Contract's a contract. You two can fight about it in your own time. He pressed a data pad into Egan's hand, got a quick thumb scan, and left. Egan found himself alone with a tall, green-skinned alien woman who apparently was legally bound to him, at least as far as the station's archaic system was concerned. She smiled, showing a glimpse of pointed canines. Well, dear husband, shall we get going? Egan squeezed his eyes shut, fighting a headache that was already forming. Great. Just come aboard, I guess. The last thing he wanted was for the station's security cameras to catch them loitering or for someone to accuse him of holding up traffic. He needed to figure out how to fix this fiasco. So, with a heavy sigh, he led Kaiva up the ramp and into the narrow, dim corridors of the Bronze Phoenix. She glanced around, taking in the exposed wires along the ceiling and the flickering lights that Egan smacked to keep them on. She mused. Sorry, it's not exactly a luxury cruiser, he muttered. Not that you should be here in the first place. He ducked into the cockpit, which was cramped but functional. 2 padded chairs sat side by side, though Egan rarely had anyone riding along. An array of battered consoles and monitors displayed readouts about the ship's precarious status. The reactor was at 73% efficiency, the life support filters needed cleaning, and Thruster 3 had an intermittent fault. Kaiva followed, her footsteps making a soft tap against the metal floor. She walked with a lithe confidence that made Egan instinctively keep a step ahead, as if her presence might unsettle him more than it already had. Why do you look like you're bracing for an attack? She teased. Afraid I'll bite? He sank into the pilot's chair and ran a hand over his face. I'm not afraid, I'm just... He took a breath. I'm dealing with a ridiculous situation, one that's going to cost me a fortune if I can't fix it. She folded her arms, regarding him calmly. Oh, and what's that? If I try to return you, I face a contract breach. The penalty is more than my entire savings. If I keep you on this ship, that's also not something I intended. Her gaze flicked over him, the lines of her mouth curving into a wry smile. What did you intend to do with your brand new bride, exactly? Egan's cheeks heated. He was certain it was obvious he hadn't planned to buy a bride at all. I intended to buy a maintenance drone, he said through clenched teeth, and now you're here, and I have no idea what to do about it. She studied the dull gray panels of the cockpit. Well, let's see. According to your contract, you're supposed to tame me, yes? His gut clenched. That's a vile term. I'm not going to do anything like that. Kaiva let out a soft laugh. You're not the typical buyer, are you? You have no idea. He turned to the console, flipping switches to prepare for takeoff. The docking fees, refueling costs, it was all adding up. Yet if he took another job, delivering cargo for the next shady client, he'd still have to deal with this woman on board, and the syndicate's contract looming overhead. Look, he said gruffly, punching in flight clearance codes. We'll leave the station, find some remote outpost. I'll see if there's a lawyer or a clerk who can undo this mess. You're free to go whenever. That's the plan. Kaiva drifted behind him, close enough that he felt the warmth of her presence. He resisted the urge to turn around. How noble, she said. Though I wonder, are you sure you won't just abandon me? He sighed. I'm not that kind of person. The engines powered up. The Bronze Phoenix shuddered and rose from its docking clamps, drifting toward the exit corridor. Egan tried to ignore how Kaiva's reflection in the cracked windshield kept drawing his eye. She was scanning the instruments with a keen interest, as though she understood more about spaceship systems than he had expected. "I'm used to men who treat me like a weapon or a trophy," she murmured. "But you're different, Egan. Don't read too much into it," he said, guiding the ship into open space. When the stars opened around them, Egan set an autopilot course for a nearby sector. The laws there were looser, and maybe he could find an official who wasn't entirely in syndicate pockets. "It a couple hours," he grunted. "Stay out of trouble until then." Kava glided to the co-pilot's chair, settled in with a graceful shift of her hips. "Trouble tends to find me, you know. Just don't sabotage my ship." She laughed, a throaty sound. "I make no promises." Egan leaned back. Every muscle in his body felt knotted, as though anticipating chaos. The entire predicament was surreal. Him, an out-of-luck pilot, now contract-bound to a bride from who knew where. He told himself that once they landed, he'd fix this. He just had to keep her from making everything worse in the meantime. But as Kaiva propped her boots up on the console and shot him a teasing grin, he had a sinking feeling that worse was about to become his new normal. By the time they were halfway to the outpost, Egan's nerves were fried. Kaiva seemed determined to meddle with every inch of the Bronze Phoenix. She discovered the gravity controls, thought it would be entertaining to flick them off mid-slight. Egan ended up floating above his pilot's seat, cursing as he batted frantically at the console until he re-engaged gravity. She also found the comm system. Egan had an open channel to a cargo client, an old friend named Carver, who regularly hired him to deliver sealed crates across frontier worlds. Egan needed Carver's money to stay afloat, so he was trying his best to sound professional while explaining the estimated timeline. Kava leaned over him and purred into the microphone. "My darling pilot is very thorough, especially with his hands." The silence that followed was deafening. Egan wrenched the mic away, sputtering. "We'll talk later," he growled, slamming the comms off. He swung around to glare at Kaev. "What was that for?" She arched an eyebrow. "You didn't say I couldn't talk." His jaw tightened. "I told you, no messing with my comms. I need that client." "Relax," she said, feigning innocence. He seemed delighted by the idea you might have a bondmate. Egan's face burned. "He's going to ask me 1,000,000 questions now, and you might have scared him off." Kaiva shrugged. "At least you'll have some interesting gossip to share." He wanted to shout at her, but a deep breath forced him to calm. Yelling never solved anything. Instead, he pointed a stern finger at her. "From now on, you stay out of the cockpit unless I'm present. Got it?" She gave a mock salute. "Whatever you say, husband." He grimaced. "Stop calling me that." In response, she just chuckled and sauntered off to explore the rest of the ship. Egan let his head drop back against the seat. This was a nightmare. Yet beneath his frustration, a faint spark of curiosity flickered. There was something about Kava's wry humor, her casual disregard for the ridiculous contract, that pulled at him. She wasn't timid or frightened about her circumstances. She acted like she was in control. That night, or what passed for night in the artificial day cycle of the Bronze Phoenix, Egan tried to focus on finalizing a cargo manifest. However, an urgent beep from the console broke his concentration. He glanced at the readout, seeing a new route keyed into the nav system, one that veered away from the outpost and toward a more remote region known for asteroid belts and unscrupulous traders. He cursed, "Kava, get in here." She arrived, arms crossed. "Is there a problem? You changed our course." She flashed a smug smile. "I found a more interesting path." "You think this is a game?" Egan snapped. "Do you know how dangerous that sector is?" She lifted one shoulder in a lazy shrug. "I can handle danger." Egan stabbed at the controls, trying to correct the course, but the autopilot was locked. She had overridden it. "Damn it," he muttered, diving into manual override. She leaned casually on the console, watching him struggle. "You told me not to touch your precious comms." "You never mentioned the nav system." His teeth ground. It took him a solid 2 minutes to wrest back control. The moment he succeeded, he set them on a direct path back to the outpost. He turned to confront her, fury in his eyes, but her gaze was calm, almost amused. "You need to lighten up," she said with a purr. "Lighten up?" You could have gotten us killed, but I didn't, she countered, lips curving. Then her voice dropped a notch. Is this how you plan to tame me? By yelling? He froze. The very word tame made him sick. That was the last thing he wanted. Kava studied his face with curiosity, like she couldn't quite figure him out. You're not like other men who come for me, she said quietly. They always talk about taming and controlling me, but you're just angry because you're messing with my ship, he growled, and my livelihood. She nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose that's reason enough. But part of you is also appalled by the idea, isn't it? Owning me. His chest felt tight. I don't want to own you, he said, voice barely above a whisper. She held his gaze for a moment, golden eyes unblinking. Then she pushed off the console. Good, she said, and left him standing there, heart pounding in confusion. The next morning, Egan was awakened by an alarm blaring in the corridor. He leapt out of his bunk, stumbling over scattered tools before racing to the cockpit. Kava was already there, her expression surprisingly serious. Chip inbound, she said, pointing to the scanner. No ID, no transponder. He checked the readout. Pirates, they materialized from behind an asteroid cluster, small and sleek, aiming laser cannons at the Bronze Phoenix's flank. A crackle came over the external comm. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Egan's hand flew to the throttle. Not happening. He boosted the engines to max, the ship lurching into an evasive arc. Kaiva shifted to the weapons console and brought the shields online. He shot her a wary glance. You know how to do that? She rolled her eyes. Yes, I fired a few guns in my time. A barrage of laser fires streaked across their bow, shaking the Phoenix violently. Egan's panel flashed warnings about shield integrity dropping. Hang on, he barked, weaving between tumbling rocks. The pirates followed, nimble enough to dodge collisions. Another hit rocked them from behind. Sparks rained down from a cracked conduit overhead. Egan wrestled with the controls, cursing. Kava tapped rapidly on the targeting system. Keep them in my line of sight. I'll return fire. He clenched his jaw, guiding the Phoenix in a dizzying spiral that brought them momentarily behind a large asteroid. The pirate ship swung around, but Kaiba fired first, a plasma bolt that clipped their engine. A small explosion tore along the pirate hull. They stayed in pursuit, but slower now, and Egan saw his opening. He cut power abruptly, letting inertia carry them. The pirate ship overshot, right into the path of a drifting rock. The impact was catastrophic, sending debris scattering across the void. Egan exhaled a shaky breath as the thread icon blinked out. Kava stepped back from the console, her features lit by the dying glow of the final explosion. She turned to Egan, adrenaline flashing in her eyes. We survived, she said, voice throaty with excitement. He nodded, a near laugh escaping him. Thanks to you? Her lips curved. You did the flying. I just fired. They stared at each other, hearts pounding in the aftermath. Then Egan glanced away, clearing his throat. Yeah. Good job. For once, she didn't reply with a smug remark. Instead, she looked at him with an expression closer to respect, as if he'd proven himself. But as the tension ebbed, a wave of exhaustion and relief washed over them both. Egan's hands shook slightly. He was used to scrapes with authorities, but rarely with violent pirates, and definitely not with a gorgeous, lethal alien woman by his side. They drifted to a safer corridor of space before Egan locked in a new course, ensuring no more uninvited visitors would catch them off guard. Let's run a diagnostic, he said, voice low. Cave nodded. I'll check for hull breaches. He watched her move through the corridor, footsteps purposeful. She never seemed rattled, not even with pirates after them. The question swirled in his mind. Who was she, really? That she'd handle a plasma cannon so naturally. He swallowed and returned to the pilot's seat, ignoring the knot in his stomach. Later, once the damage was assessed, thankfully minor beyond some shield generator issues, Egan decided to store the cargo crates more securely. He prided himself on never losing a shipment. If he didn't deliver them intact, his client would refuse payment. So he headed to the cargo bay, but froze at the threshold. One of the most valuable crates was missing. the large one containing specialized reactor couplings that had cost a small fortune. "Kava," he called, a note of panic creeping in. "Tell me you didn't move anything in here?" Her voice drifted from behind a stack of boxes. "Depends on what you mean by move." Kava. She stepped out, arms folded across her chest. "I adjusted a few of your auto parameters for spacing. Some worthless contraband nearly crushed the good stuff." "That worthless contraband was reactor couplings worth a small fortune," he said sharply, scanning the bay. Then he glanced at the external camera feed. Sure enough, one crate hovered outside, dangerously close to drifting away into the planet's upper atmosphere. His heart lurched. "They're about to fall," she shrugged, strolling to the panel. "Well, you'd best hurry if you don't want them lost." Egan's brain fired on all cylinders. He scrambled to the cargo arm controls, cursing under his breath. The crate was still within grappling range, but only barely. If it dropped any further, it would burn up on re-entry. He seized the manual override, adjusting the ship's position. The thrusters whirred, pivoting them until the cargo arm could latch onto the floating container. Kava studied the readouts. "You can't do it alone," she murmured. "The alignment is off by a fraction." "I can handle it," he growled. "Don't meddle." She rolled her eyes but stepped in beside him, reaching for the control panel. "Let me help. You'll lose your precious couplings otherwise." He hesitated but realized they didn't have time to argue. "Fine. Make sure your calculations are right." Together they maneuvered the robotic arm. Kaive displayed surprising finesse, compensating for gravity shifts. Egan adjusted thrusters to keep the crate from drifting. A long moment passed. Then the clamps locked onto the container with a satisfying thud. Egan slumped in relief. "Thank the stars." Kava observed the screen. "All good. You've got your fortune back." He turned on her, voice shaking with anger and leftover adrenaline. "You nearly cost me that fortune. Do you know how important those couplings are? Without them, I'd be bankrupt." Her expression flickered with something unreadable. "I wasn't going to let them fall," he huffed. "Could have fooled me. Why even do it?" She smoothed a hand over her braid. "Maybe I wanted to see how resourceful you were. Maybe I was bored." He exhaled, forcing himself to calm. This is insane. I'm risking everything by letting you roam free on my ship." She leaned against a cargo crate, crossing her legs at the ankle. "Yet, you haven't thrown me out an airlock." He shot her a withering look. "I'm not a monster." A faint smile curled her lips. "No." That was the first time he'd heard genuine warmth in her tone. The tension in his shoulders eased a notch. Maybe she wasn't just trying to ruin him after all. When he left the cargo bay, she followed at a distance, silent as a cat. Back in the corridor, he spun to face her. "Look," he said, "if you have some grudge against me, let's address it. But messing with my livelihood is crossing a line." She studied him for a moment. "No grudge. If I truly wanted you destroyed, I'd have done worse." "Comforting," he frowned. "I can't tell if you're serious or just messing with me." She lifted her chin, eyes gleaming. "Serious. I don't want you dead, Egan. I'd have no fun then." "Fun, right?" he muttered. Her gaze didn't waver. "Don't pretend you're not intrigued by me." He opened his mouth to retort but found no immediate denial. His chest constricted at how close she stood, the subtle warmth radiating from her. She smelled faintly of spices and distant night air, an odd combination, but alluring. She gave a soft, almost predatory smile. "You could just admit it, you know." He stepped back, forcing distance. "Let's keep things professional, if that's even possible." "That word," she teased, "so stiff, so cold." He clenched his teeth. "Because we have a business arrangement, sort of. I can't afford to let feelings or—" He trailed off, not sure how to phrase his own confusion. She laughed softly. "I'm a purchased bride, supposedly meant to be tamed. You must realize how absurd that is. And you, dear pilot, have no real desire to do the taming. So yes, it's all quite unprofessional." He dragged a hand through his hair. "One day at a time, please. One catastrophe at a time." She gave him a slow nod. as though accepting his boundaries for the moment. Then she disappeared around the corner, leaving him with his heart pounding too hard in his chest. The next day, Egan settled into the cockpit, double-checking the new autopilot route for the 100th time. He had locked out any alternate access so Kaiva couldn't tamper again. They were only a few hours away from a neutral station in the Farnex sector. If all went well, he'd find a legal clerk who could override or at least challenge the marriage contract. He was reviewing the logs when Kaiva slipped into the co-pilot's chair. He stiffened, but she didn't reach for the controls. Instead, she rested her elbows on her knees and gazed out the window at the starfield. "Are you really so desperate to get rid of me?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. I'm desperate to fix this situation. It's not personal." She tilted her head. "Because you hate the idea of owning someone? That's part of it," he admitted. "Also, I can't afford the fines. And you obviously don't want to be stuck with me either." She shrugged, her gaze distant. "I've been stuck with worse." He glanced at her sharply. "What does that mean?" She let out a slow breath. "I haven't exactly been living a carefree life. You might find this shocking, but I was raised in a syndicate facility. They call it training, but it's more like conditioning. Some are turned into servants or spies. Others are used for other purposes." A cold weight settled in his stomach. "That's awful." Her lips twitched in a humorless smile. "The irony is I spent years escaping men who wanted to break me, only to end up sold again by some glitchy system to you." He rubbed his temples, guilt gnawing at him. "Look, I never meant for that to happen. If I could undo it right now, I would." She studied him, the gold in her eyes searching his face. "I believe you." Silence fell between them, a heavier sort of quiet than before. Egan stared at the flickering nav lights, feeling a tangle of emotions he couldn't quite place. Eventually, Kaiva stood. She moved close enough that he felt the warmth of her presence at his shoulder. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "You know how to fly, how to fight, how to keep this old ship going. But do you know how to trust someone you barely know?" He swallowed. "That's not something I've had the luxury to do." Her fingertips brushed the back of his chair. "Then maybe it's time you learn." She slipped out, leaving him uncertain whether she was offering a chance at genuine connection or simply another challenge to his nerves. As the Bronze Phoenix approached the Farnex station, Egan tried to hail the local authorities for docking permission. Static crackled in response. He tried again. Still nothing. A dread rose in him. Why aren't they answering? Kaiva entered the cockpit just as the sensors pinged an incoming transmission. Finally, a voice echoed across the speakers. "Unidentified vessel, we have you on scope. Docking is unavailable. We are under lockdown. Pirates have been attacking inbound ships. Approach at your own risk." Egan clenched his jaw. "That's fantastic." "Pirates again?" The voice repeated, "No docking clearance, I'm sorry. We're shutting down to secure local systems." Then the line went dead. Kaiva shook her head. "So much for your clerk." He drummed his fingers on the console. "We might still find a smaller outpost, maybe in the next system, or we wait until the lockdown lifts." Before he could decide, a proximity alarm shrilled. Another unmarked ship had emerged behind them, faster and heavily armed. Egan's stomach sank. Not again. Kaiva read the readouts. "The Farnex station must have scared them off, so they're turning on us." Egan gunned the engines. "Hold on, we'll lose them in that asteroid belt up ahead." She smiled slightly, sliding into the co-pilot seat. "Round two," he offered her a tense nod, half grin. "Let's see if your aim is as good as last time." They dove into the belt, weaving through tumbling rocks. The pirate vessel trailed them, firing bursts of laser fire that lit up the cockpit with white-hot flashes. Egan narrowly avoided a collision with a spinning chunk of iron. Kaiva returned fire, each shot forcing the pirates to dodge. They traded volleys in a lethal dance until Egan spotted a cluster of massive asteroids in close proximity. "Brace yourself," he muttered. He cut thrusters, letting them drift in freefall. The pirate ship soared past, searching for them. Kaiva smirked. Clever. Egan suddenly fired thrusters again. They surged upward behind the pirates, and Keva let loose a barrage of plasma. One shot connected with the enemy's reactor plating, triggering a chain reaction that rocked the belt in a burst of debris. When the smoke cleared, the pirate ship was out of commission, venting atmosphere and drifting aimlessly. Egan's breath came fast, adrenaline surging. Keva turned to him, eyes shining. Without a word, she launched herself out of the co-pilot's seat, crossing the small space in an instant. Her hands gripped the collar of his jacket, pulling him close, and before he knew it, her lips crashed against his. He made a startled sound, some mix of protest and raw need. The tension, the near-death experience, and the repeated close quarters all fueled this reckless kiss. She tasted like danger and possibility, her breath hot against his mouth. For a heartbeat, he let himself drown in it. He let go of the pilot's controls and cupped her face, deepening the kiss. She gave a soft, encouraging moan, pressing closer until there was no space between them. Then reason kicked in. He broke away, cheeks flushed. Sorry. She didn't release him, only loosened her grip slightly. Her eyes gleamed with desire and a hint of triumph. Why are you apologizing? He cleared his throat, heart still pounding. Not sure this is wise. Kaiva brushed her thumb across his lower lip, making his pulse spike again. Maybe not. But you kissed me back. He couldn't deny it. The moment had been electric, a floodgate opened. But he was torn between attraction and the uneasy sense that everything in his life had spiraled out of control. She leaned back, scanning his conflicted expression. I won't force you, Egan, she said softly. But if you want me, I won't say no. His mouth went dry. We barely know each other, she shrugged, stepping away, though her gaze lingered on him. Then we can keep trying to kill pirates together, see if that helps us bond? A half laugh escaped him, tension dissolving slightly. A real romantic, aren't you? She winked. You have no idea. They spent the next hour scouring the star maps for alternative docking stations. Each option was either locked down or too far. Eventually, Egan sighed in frustration. I have a cargo delivery for Carver to finalize, he muttered, typing messages that never went through. At this rate, I'll be late, and I won't get paid. Keva glanced over his shoulder. Could we meet Carver somewhere else, a neutral location? He shrugged. Possibly. Let me see if there's a small frontier outpost near enough. A short search turned up an old fueling station. Not official, but rumored to be a hangout for scavengers and black market deals. It was better than nothing. Colonel coordinates set, Egan said. Cross your fingers they haven't turned pirate themselves. Keva studied him, an odd mix of amusement and concern. I'll watch your back, pilot boy. He arched a brow. Pilot boy? She smirked. You prefer husband? He groaned. Point taken. Let's just get there in one piece. They arrived at the fueling station to discover it was little more than a ring of scrap metal orbiting a small moon. Egan maneuvered the bronze Phoenix toward a docking clamp that looked like it might break off at any moment. They stepped onto the station's main deck, greeted by stale air and flickering neon signs in an alien script. A few shady figures loitered near a rusted bar entrance, eyeing them suspiciously. Egan placed a call to Carver, who thankfully answered. They arranged to meet in an hour. Keva wandered off while Egan was discussing details, and by the time he finished, she was nowhere in sight. He panicked briefly, scanning the corridors. She was apt to stir trouble. Finally, he found her in a dim corner near a set of vending kiosks, talking to a tall, insectoid alien. She noticed Egan approaching and dismissed the insectoid with a casual wave. The creature scurried away. Who was that? Egan demanded. She shrugged. Just a local. Relax. He frowned. I leave you alone for 5 minutes and you're off making deals. She chuckled. Not deals, just gathering info. This place is crawling with would-be bounty hunters. You should watch yourself. Me? He asked, confused. She leaned in. Word around is that the syndicate put a bounty on a runaway Vasher. Possibly me. They might also be interested in the man who bought her, if you're unwilling to return her. A chill swept over him. He should have guessed. The syndicate wouldn't let an expensive asset go without a fight. "What do we do?" he asked in a low voice. Keva glanced around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "For now, deliver your cargo, get paid, then we vanish." He caught her gaze, reading the flicker of genuine concern. "Vanish where?" She exhaled. "Anywhere that isn't under syndicate control." His mind whirled. That sounded expensive and dangerous, but if the syndicate truly wanted her back, they'd stop at nothing. Soon after, Carver arrived, a squat man with thick arms and a hearty laugh, though his grin faded when he saw Kaiva at Egan's side. "Didn't know you were traveling with company," Carver said, eyes suspicious. Egan forced a light tone. "Picked up a partner recently. She's skilled." Keva inclined her head politely. Carver raised a brow but didn't press. Instead, he counted out Egan's payment and scanned the crates that Egan had offloaded from the Phoenix. "All here? Looks intact?" Egan nodded. "Despite a few hiccups. Payment will keep me flying for another round." Carver nodded and stuffed the credit chips into Egan's hand. "Got any new runs lined up?" Before Egan could answer, a pair of armed thugs barged into the cargo hold. Their eyes went straight to Keva. One, a bulky man with scaly implants across his jaw, sneered. "That's the alien," he said. Egan tensed. Carver cursed under his breath and edged away. "We have a contract from the syndicate," the second thug said. "Hand her over, and no one gets hurt." Egan's stomach churned. He felt the weight of the credit chips in his pocket, money he desperately needed, but every fiber of his being rebelled at the thought of handing Kaiva to these scum. Kaiva hissed softly, eyes narrowing. "Over my dead body." The first thug aimed a blaster. "That can be arranged." Egan stood in front of her, heart hammering. "Don't do something stupid," he warned. Carver threw up his hands. "Hey, I got no dog in this fight, fellas. I'm just a businessman." Egan realized he was on his own. Two armed men, probably skilled in violence. Kaiva might handle one if she were quick, but the other could shoot them both before they got halfway across the room. He felt Kaiva shift at his side, coiled like a spring. He placed a hand on her arm, a silent signal to wait. The second thug snorted. "Move aside, pilot. We want the alien. Don't make us kill you, too." Egan took a slow breath, mind racing. Then he sprang into motion, grabbing the nearest crate and heaving it at the thug. The man fired, but the shot went wide, slagging the metal floor. Kaiva seized the chance, lunging forward with a vicious kick that disarmed him. The first thug shot at her, grazing her shoulder. She let out a pained snarl but remained on her feet. Egan flung himself to the side, scooping up a small energy baton from a nearby tool bench. He activated it with a crackle and drove it into the thug's flank. Electric sparks lit up the dark cargo bay. The thug collapsed, twitching. Kaiva pinned the second thug, pressing a knee on his chest. Her eyes were feral. "You want to tame me? Think again." He tried to spit in her face, so she clocked him hard across the jaw. He went limp, unconscious. Egan's pulse thundered, adrenaline singing in his veins. "Let's get out of here," he breathed. Carver, who had wisely stayed out of the fray, whistled. "Damn, Egan, you sure know how to pick 'em." "She's lethal." Egan didn't bother replying. He hurried to gather the credit chips, then took Kaiva's arm. She winced, blood staining the fabric near her shoulder. "Come on," he said, concern evident. "We need to patch you up." They raced back to the Bronze Phoenix, sealing the cargo ramp behind them. The moment they were in space again, Egan dragged her to the med bay, rummaging for the auto suture kit. She leaned on a counter, breathing through pain. "Just a graze." He carefully cut away the scorched sleeve, revealing a thin burn along her emerald skin. "Hold still," she hissed when he applied the antiseptic, her face tight with discomfort. "Sorry," he muttered, pressing the auto-suture. The device beeped, applying a neat line of nano-bandage that knitted the damaged tissue. Her tension eased slightly, and she exhaled. "Thank you." He realized how close they were, her body inches from his, the memory of that desperate kiss still burning in his mind. She turned her golden eyes on him, intensity flaring. "Why did you protect me?" she asked softly. "You could have turned me over and avoided all this trouble." He set the kid aside, swallowing hard. "I'm not in the business of selling people out." Her gaze lingered on his face. "Even if it costs you everything." He shrugged. Might cost me some credits, sure, but I can't just hand you over to those creeps." She reached up, fingers ghosting across his cheek. "You're a strange man, Egan, in a good way." Her touch sent a spark through him. She didn't push for a kiss this time, just studied him. He felt naked under that stare, every cynical barrier cracking. "Strange is all I've got going for me," he said, a shaky laugh escaping. She leaned in until her forehead touched his. It was a tender gesture, and he found himself closing his eyes. He could sense her warmth, the steady rise and fall of her breath. "I don't know how this ends," she murmured, "but maybe we can figure it out together." A quiet beat passed. Egan's arms found their way around her, careful of her injured shoulder. She tucked her head against his chest, a subtle tremor in her posture as the adrenaline wore off. All he could think was how bizarre and yet right it felt, holding this alien woman who, by some absurd twist of fate, ended up in his life. Eventually they separated, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air. Egan cleared his throat. "We should plot a course somewhere the Syndicate can't easily reach. I hear rumors of an unregulated zone beyond the Helix Nebula." Keva nodded, stepping back. "If you're sure." He managed a crooked grin. "I guess we're fugitives now. Might as well embrace it." She answered with a soft laugh that turned into a wince as the movement tugged at her injury. "Rest," he urged. "I'll handle the flight." She allowed him to guide her to a bunk, then collapsed onto the narrow mattress. He watched her for a moment, ensuring she was comfortable. Then he returned to the cockpit and set the course. Every new star on the display felt like a step into the unknown. But perhaps that was better than the alternative. The next few days were a blur of tension and fleeting calm. They stayed off standard routes, cutting through less patrolled sectors. Egan used the credits from Carver's transaction to buy fuel and supplies at shady outposts. Keva's shoulder healed quickly, though she still favored it. She spent hours learning the Phoenix systems, assisting with minor repairs. They fell into a tentative routine, sharing rations and occasionally drifting into companionable silence. Other times they'd bicker about small things, like her penchant for messing with the gravity controls whenever he teased her, or the time he tried to reorganize her personal stash of alien trinkets she kept in a spare locker. But underlying it all was a growing closeness, an unspoken current of attraction that flared whenever they locked eyes or brushed shoulders in the narrow corridors. One evening, as they floated past the swirling pink haze of the Helix Nebula, Egan found Keva in the cockpit, gazing through the forward viewport. She looked introspective, her posture less guarded than usual. He approached quietly. "Penny for your thoughts?" She gave him a quizzical look. I don't know what a penny is, but I was thinking about my future. I never had one before, not really. I was always running. Now, I'm still running, but I'm not alone." He stood beside her, hands sliding into his pockets. "I get it. I've drifted from job to job, never letting anyone get close." She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "But what if we stopped drifting?" A tangle of emotions rose in his chest. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated, the subtle vulnerability in her eyes nearly undoing him. "I'm not sure what I want, to be honest. Freedom, obviously, but maybe I want a chance to choose where to go, rather than be forced." Egan studied her face, seeing a flicker of hope he recognized from his own reflection. "We could find a remote colony, maybe. Start fresh, or keep moving, if you'd rather see every corner of the galaxy." She offered a small smile. "Both sound tempting. But will the Syndicate always be hunting us?" His jaw tightened. "Possibly, unless we figure out a way to void their contract or bury ourselves so deep they can't find us." Keva set a hand on his arm, curling her fingers gently. "We'll figure it out." Without further words, she rose onto her toes, pressed her lips to his cheek. A simple kiss, but it lingered. He turned his head and their mouths met in a slow, deliberate gesture of mutual acceptance. This time there was no rush of battle adrenaline fueling them, just a quiet, burning closeness. Her arms slipped around his neck, and he let himself sink into the moment. When they finally broke apart, Her breath was warm against his ear. "You're a good man, Egan," she said softly. "I haven't met many of those." He held her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm trying." The weeks that followed tested them more than once. A syndicate scout crossed their path near a deserted planet, nearly catching them off guard. But Keva jammed the scout's signals while Egan executed a dangerous maneuver through a labyrinth of canyons. They emerged unscathed, hearts hammering and hands gripping each other in breathless relief. Meanwhile, the marriage contract still loomed, an invisible chain linking them in a way neither had asked for. Egan researched legalities, discovered that reversing it required either a special hearing with a recognized official or hacking into the syndicate's central registry. Neither seemed feasible in the short term. At last, they decided on a plan. One of Egan's old acquaintances, a rogue programmer named Dev, lived in a floating junk station on the outskirts of the Helix Nebula. Dev owed Egan some favors. If anyone could break the contract or scramble syndicate files, it was her. So they plotted a course, bracing for whatever might come next. When they arrived at Dev's hideout, a ramshackle fortress of welded hulls and outdated satellites, Egan felt the usual swirl of trepidation. Dev always had a price, even for a friend. They docked, made their way through narrow corridors lined with blinking server racks. Sparks danced along overhead cables. Dev, a wiry woman with goggles perched on spiky pink hair, greeted them with a mischievous grin. "Well, well, if it isn't Egan the eternal debtor. Who's your stunning companion?" Keva arched a brow but gave a polite nod. Egan cleared his throat. "This is Keva. We have a problem that needs your expertise." Dev's sharp eyes flicked between them. "Oh, I've heard rumors. Word's out you're hauling around a syndicate bride." Keva bristled at the term, but Egan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We want that contract nullified. Can you do it?" Dev tapped a console, bringing up screens of code. "Possibly, but you realize syndicate networks are heavily encrypted, right?" Egan nodded, checking his credit balance. "Name your price." Dev eyed them both. "I'll do it for half the standard fee, in exchange for one favor. A transport job. I need some contraband delivered to a contact in the outer reaches." Egan frowned. More smuggling. It never ended. But if it freed Kaiva, he looked at Kaiva. She gave him a slight nod, as if to say it was his call. "All right," he agreed. "Deal." Dev rubbed her hands in glee. "Great, let's get started." She guided them into a side chamber lined with servers asking for their personal data chips to interface with syndicate records. Keva slid a small chip from a hidden pocket, and Egan produced the ID chip he used for docking permits. Dev spent hours hunched over consoles, muttering. Kaiva and Egan paced, occasionally refilling her coffee mug or handing her tools. Finally, Dev let out a victorious whoop. "Done. I've severed the link between your ID and hers. As far as the syndicate's main database is concerned, the contract never existed." Keva blinked, tension draining from her shoulders. "We're free?" "More or less," Dev confirmed. "They'll probably have backup somewhere, but this should buy you a huge advantage. If a checkpoint scans your chips, they won't see any active marriage contract." A wave of relief hit Egan so strongly he almost laughed. "You're a miracle worker, Dev," she cackled. "Yeah, well, you owe me that run. Don't forget." They left Dev's workshop carrying an encrypted drive with instructions on where to deliver the contraband. Egan felt 20 pounds lighter. He glanced at Kaeva, who was oddly quiet. When they reached the Bronze Phoenix, she turned to him, eyes shining. "So, you did it. You broke our legal bond." He studied her face, unsure how to read her expression. "Wasn't that what we wanted?" She hesitated, then nodded. "It was." "I'm grateful, truly. But," he prompted, sensing her conflict. She sighed, looking at the ship's hull. "It just feels strange. For the first time, I'm not bound to anyone or anything. I can go wherever I want, do whatever I want." He swallowed hard. "So, you'll leave?" A flicker of pain crossed her features. "Do you want me to?" His chest felt tight. He reached for her hand. "No, but I won't stop you. Your life is your own now." She laced her fingers with his, her grip firm. "Then I guess I'm staying. For as long as you'll have me." Relief and joy surged in him. "I'd have you as long as you'll put up with me." She smiled, and his heart skipped a beat at how genuine it looked. They boarded the ship side by side. The ramp sealed, the engines hummed to life. Egan guided the Phoenix away from Dev's station, mind swirling with fresh possibilities. The illicit cargo Dev had entrusted them with was a small crate containing who knows what. Egan supposed he shouldn't look if he didn't want more trouble, but delivering it would net them the final portion of the contract break, and after that, maybe they'd find some quiet star system or roam from one world to another on their own terms. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Kaiva joined him in the cockpit, no longer glancing at the co-pilot's seat like a usurper. Now she slid in with a surety that said she belonged. He met her gaze, remembering how it felt to kiss her, how it felt to fight alongside her. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked softly. She snorted. "If it's anything like the last few, it'll be chaotic. Let's hope it's a little less life-threatening this time," he joked. Then he sobered. "But if trouble comes, we'll handle it. Together." She leaned over, resting a hand on his thigh. "I like the sound of that, pilot." His breath caught. "Me too." Outside, the stars stretched into brilliant lines as he engaged the faster-than-light drive. The bronze Phoenix soared forward, carrying them into an unwritten future. Their past tangles, the syndicate, the forced contract, were becoming distant memories. Kaiva studied the swirling cosmic light outside the viewport. "You know, the station where you bought me, accidentally, of course, it claimed I was meant to be tamed." He grimaced. "Yeah, that was the translation. Ridiculous, archaic nonsense." She smirked, a dangerous sparkle in her eyes. "Maybe I tamed you instead." He barked a laugh. "Ha ha, I won't deny you've turned my life upside down." She slid closer, warm breath tickling his ear. "And do you mind?" He curled an arm around her waist, pulling her against him. His voice was low and steady. "Not one bit." They shared a slow, lingering kiss as the drive propelled them into hyperspace. The hum of the engines and the glow of the console lights wrapped around them, a cocoon of possibility. Wherever they went, however many jobs they took, one thing was certain. He was no longer alone, and neither was she. They were forging their own path, free of contracts and old obligations, bound only by the choice they made each day to stand side by side. It was strange, it was thrilling, and it was more than either of them had hoped for when this wild journey began. But that was the beauty of it, an accident that had become the best risk Egan had ever taken. In the quiet hush of the cockpit, with stars shimmering beyond the hull, Egan and Kaiva stayed locked in one another's arms, letting the swirling cosmos bear witness to the moment they decided, beyond any doubt, that this was exactly where they both belonged. They might not be husband and wife in the syndicate's eyes anymore, but in their own way they'd chosen each other, and that was more genuine than any contract could ever be.